Um, I'll start with an introduction of myself. Though I always find it incredibly difficult to talk about myself, often when people tell me to, or they ask me the question, it's always a very simple question: who are you? Or can you tell us about yourself? And I always find it, a bit tough to just begin talking about myself, because if I really ask who am I, then I think of that little boy who grew up in a small town of Uganda, and it wasn't a very nice experience. And so I kind of have this feeling that I'm supposed to be talking about this boy and to tell people about this little boy, which always, then, there's always that like hesitation to talk about myself. So so there's always that bit of hesitation to open up and talk about myself. But over the years, I've kind of been trying to get over it and to sort of, find a way of telling people about the adult I've become and not the boy that I was, the boy who still lurks around in my dreams, giving me nightmares once in a while, and that kind of thing. So, in general, I think of myself as a storyteller. Sometimes, of course, I'll introduce myself as a writer, and sometimes I'll say I'm a filmmaker, sometimes I'll say I'm a digital artist, sometimes I'll say I'm all these, and I'll say I'm an all-round storyteller. I don't even know what that means, but yeah, I think at the bottom of it all is story. Like, I have a story, or I think I have a story to tell, and I want to tell this story. I don't exactly know what this story is, because up until recently, I never used to write about this little boy that I'm telling you about. I used to write from a point of view that kind of is not exactly the point of view of this little guy, because I think all my life I've been trying to run away from who I was as a child. I've been trying to build for myself this other life, or this other kind of image that I want people to see. And somehow this has seeped into my stories, and so I'm not sure exactly what the story is I want to tell. However, what was I talking about? Okay, however, I have, I keep doing this. Like, I just lose my train of thoughts always whenever I'm trying to give an introduction that really goes back in my life, like from way back. I know it's kind of psychology. I think if it was a psychologist, they will be telling me I'm kind of hesitant to talk about that part of my life. But I know at some point I really have to talk about it, and I think that is kind of the story that I have to be telling, or that I should be telling at some point. So I grew up in a small town of Uganda. It's about 3 or 4 hours away from the capital city. It's a very small town along the border with Kenya. So it's kind of a cultural melting point. There were, I think in my town, okay, in many towns of Uganda, you will find only one ethnic group being predominant. But in this small town, there were maybe 8, 9 ethnic groups, all in one small town. And in this way, it was actually much more diverse than the capital city, Kampala, which is dominated by the one ethnic group called Baganda. So my town is called Tororo, and it's a beautiful place with a really nice rock that overshadows the town. And I think, like in most of my stories, for a long time, they used to happen in such small towns, which if you're in a bus and you're driving by, you probably wouldn't bother to find the name of that place. Or maybe Tororo you'll try to find, because it was a bit bigger than one of those nameless towns you see along the road, but you get the idea. Because Tororo, it's basically, it's a kind of a sleepy town, like, nothing much happens there, and pretty much everybody knows everyone. So I'm in this town, and of course, if you're in such a town, it's very difficult to live your life anonymously, or to even gain a certain sense of privacy. Wherever you go, you kind of have a sense that everybody knows you and everybody is looking at you. But this is kind of exacerbated when you have a disability, because then your presence is amplified. Because you don't really look like other people, you kind of look like you're different. You're very different from everyone else. And so yeah, I lost my train of thought again. But yeah, so you're in this kind of town, and and there are people, they are looking at you as someone different. It's kind of a patriarchal society, very much patriarchal, where men are expected to be the providers of the family. So somebody with a disability would not exactly fit into the provider role, and so of course, you're treated as not fully man, and you're not even treated as a woman, because women are also supposed to do a lot of work in their homes or around their homes. And then, so I was caught somewhere in between there, not being seen as a man, not being seen as a fully human being, and I think most of the wording which was used to describe me was useless. Even from my parents, actually. My mom used to say this a lot about me, and out loud, and I would hear it. And she will say it like knowing I'm aware she's talking about it. So yeah, and so living in that kind of town where first people know each other, and then secondly, your presence is amplified because you are not like everybody else. You have a disability. You walk, when you're walking, you're limping, and people see that you're actually limping, so everybody stares. It made me feel like I was growing up in some kind of fishbowl, where I couldn't, walk, and people would, or wherever I went, people would already have preconceived ideas about who I am and what I am able of, or what I'm capable of doing, and all these things. So I used to feel some kind of inferiority complex, maybe. And then I think this kind of drove me to achieve what I've achieved today, because at some point I wanted to prove to them all that, you know, I'm not useless, I am something. And I think also what this kind of childhood also did to me was give me a kind of feminist point of view. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I sort of have this I would say attachment, or maybe I find it easier. I find it much easier to I find it much easier to talk to, or to communicate with women, or to to work with women, to be in the company of women, because like all my childhood, while other boys will go out playing, they will go out climbing trees, and they were encouraged, you know, not because boys were encouraged to be adventurous and to and all that. They did not expect a boy to be hanging around home, but because I had a disability, then I couldn't run around like other boys. I had to stay home most of the time. What happened then was that I stayed around women a lot, and I was the one doing a lot of the women's works, like, you know, washing the dishes, cleaning the house, helping with cooking, all those roles that are normally associated with women kind of fell on me. And this wasn't because in our family we were only boys. We had one or two cousins who were women, but they would come and go. So most of the time I was the only one at home with the neighbors. And yeah, if a few years ago somebody asked me about, there's a film I made, it's called Her Broken Shadow, and this film had like only women in it. There was only one man, and he appears for like 10 seconds at the end of the film, but the rest of it was just a woman film. And then they were asking me that why are your characters always women? Actually, like in all my films, I think there's only one or two where the main character is a man. And I think it all comes up from this kind of upbringing where, because of the disability, I was treated as a woman, or made to sit around women like all my childhood. I of course can't say I experienced what women experience, because that's another level of things, but it was pretty close, It's really pronounced. And yeah, I know it's sometimes, even when I was growing up, you know, they used to tell me that, but you're not really disabled, and other times they will tell me, but are you just pretending to be so that, you know, you can jump the line, you know, when you're queuing for food at school or something like that. So I don't know how to put it, but yeah, I survived polio. I think, I don't know if it was polio or some other disease, but it left me disabled. I think I was maybe 1 year or 2 years. That's what my mom told me, or what I overheard her say at some point. But yeah, it's not a very visible disability. And then it kind of added to my trauma, because there other people, like you see somebody who doesn't have legs and has to crawl. You see someone who is using a wheelchair, and then here I am, I'm able to walk without any aids. It's only when I face a flight of stairs that I really feel the pinch when I'm really tired and going uphill. And yeah, and if you look at my feet without shoes on or without the stockings and all that, you'll see it's a clubbed kind of fit, and the toes are pointing downwards, and it's not natural, if you can put it that way. But then I grew up in this kind of gray world where at one point I did not want to accept it, and then but then people keep pointing it out to me that you're disabled, and then others will say that you're not, and then so I don't know what happened to me, but in my dreams I've actually never seen myself as having a disability. Yeah, it's a weird thing, really weird. I dream of myself as if I am, like everybody else. Like I walk without a limp, I run, I do everything that everybody else does. So for a long time, all the stories that I wrote were the main characters. They were able-bodied people. They did not have any kind of anything, disabling them in their lives. Like their bodies were like what you'll think about. It's only when I was in my mid-30s that I began to consciously think about the characters I was creating, and then I began to deliberately create characters who have a disability, like the main characters. But I think this started like 6 or so years ago. So all my life, I'll never really think about it that I have a disability, and sometimes I don't even think about it until somebody asks me, "Why are you limping?" Or somebody, or like there's something that really reminds me, like I'm trying to climb this flight of stairs, and then I reach halfway and I say, "Yeah, this is why I'm struggling. It's because my legs are not really strong, and the left one is really much thinner than the other one, and it's the weakest, and I actually can't even lift it without, like I can't wear shoes without holding it or something like that." So yeah, but I never dream of myself as somebody with a disability. So this never came out in the stories that I write. And the main characters, they are always, most of them, 80%, 90% of them are able-bodied. For a while, it bothered me. Actually, there is a time I was applying for a grant, and then in this grant I wrote that I'm a person with a disability. And then during the interviews, they asked me, "Have you ever made a film or written a story about people with disabilities?" And I said no, and I wanted to explain why, but they never gave me a chance. From that time, I've never really put it on my bio or anywhere that I have a disability. It was kind of a really harrowing experience. Like, they expected me as having as somebody who has a disability to be writing mostly about it. But I think you need to, I think like I'm more comfortable writing stories that I like, or stories that I want to read, and stories that are actually running around in my head. I don't have to force them onto the page. So if I don't think of myself as a person with a disability, how am I going to write stories about people with disabilities? It's kind of a tough question, because you have to write what you know. Yeah, I've never got the answer for that, but a few years ago I started to consciously work disability into my stories. I think this was mostly because I kept thinking that all the stories I consumed are about able-bodied people, and maybe just the media and these stories have kind of shaped my thinking and made me see the default human being not as a person who looks like me, or not as a person who has the issues that I have, and has a clubbed foot, which is, and a very thin, one leg being much thinner than the other. Maybe it's been shaped by the stories I've consumed. So if I start writing about people with disabilities more and more often, maybe somebody else out there with a disability will see someone who looks like them, and they won't have to have dreams in which they look like something they are not. I don't know. I don't know if it will work, or if it won't work, but for now, I think I just write the stories as they come. I don't really try to force myself to write. I don't force myself, basically. I don't write with a checklist. I don't do anything. So I let it go, kind of how the story comes, how the character comes is how I'll work it. But there's one novel that I've been trying to write ever since 2017, and I think it will be the biggest work that I've had. That kind of really draws from my life experiences, because it's about a boy with a disability and is in a town which comes under war, and then everybody runs and leaves him behind. It kind of is living through all the fears that I had to live through while growing up. Okay, this story, of course, is very directly related to disability, but most of my other stories, or all my other stories, they have or they are drawn from my life experiences. Like I told you, how I grew up with women, and now most of my main characters are women, that sort of thing, yeah? So, writing what you know, writing what you dream about, writing what you believe in, writing your life experiences, this kind of makes the writing much more richer and much more believable to the audience or to the reader. Okay, I wanted to keep talking and talking, but maybe it's been 30 minutes and you probably are already bored with all this talking. So I'll probably leave you with 2 writing prompts. It should kind of give you an exercise to do so that you can, get writing and maybe writing from a personal point of view. The other 2 videos I'm going to take you through, I'm going to show you how my life experiences informed my decisions, or how I created the stories based on my life experiences. So for now, I'm going to give you 2 writing prompts. One is write about the last meal you had in which there was a conversation. Doesn't matter who you had this meal with, but just, I know there are some times when you eat alone, but I want there to be a conversation in this meal. So maybe it's a meal you've had with more than one person, the last meal you had. So think about the conversation that was in this meal. However, put in a pregnancy, a mysterious pregnancy. Mysterious pregnancy should be in this conversation. Yeah, of course, your conversation might have been about football, it might have been about the Quran, or it might have been, I don't know, about the taste of the food itself, but whatever the conversation was, it has to revolve. Just try to remember each and every word, or not each and every word, but remember the flow of the conversation, and then make those words about a mysterious pregnancy. This is kind of how I create my stories, basically. Like, I'll take a real life event and then I throw in something which is totally unrelated, and then the story comes out. Then the second prompt is the most important event in your life. Think about the most important event in your life and write about it. However, you must add there a dead cat. Dead cat, like, cats are kind of I don't know why humans have this thing with cats. But yeah, think of anything, any important event in your life, whether it's your birthday, your 17th birthday, your wedding day, the day your father came back home after a long time away, whatever the event you think about, imagine it, write about it, but you have to include a dead cat in this event. So I saw that maybe the dead cat will be the theme of the story. So imagine it's your birthday and then there's a dead cat in your birthday. Okay, so I'll sign off from here, and I hope you enjoy this talk. I hope it helps you. I'm going to take you through two stories of mine. I'm going to take you through two stories. In this video, I'll take you through a story that I call The Leafy Man. It is a science fiction / horror, and it was the first story in my collection of short stories called A Killing in the Sun. I think it's best if I provide you with a link or with a copy of this story. I have no problem. So maybe you can read the story, and then after reading it, I talk to you about how I ended up creating it. This story, it first came to me in the early 2000s. At that time, I was falling sick of malaria, like every other week or month. So if you, you probably know about malaria. I don't know if it's there in your place, but it's mostly a mosquito-transmitted disease, and it is fatal. Yeah, like a lot of people die from malaria, but it's also curable, it is preventable, and it's one of those diseases that I really wonder why they exist even, because you have all the ways of controlling malaria, you have all the ways of fighting malaria, but somehow it is a pandemic. I mean, a lot of people are dying from it, and I wonder why. So at that time, I think I was in 22, I was falling sick every other month, like I said. So each time I fell sick, I'll go to a clinic. And then in the clinic, they would do a blood test, and then they'll tell me, oh, you have malaria. You have to take this drug, and you have to take that drug, and then you have to do this. So these drugs were kind of pricey drugs or something like that. Okay. Let me rephrase. The drugs, like every time I'll go, the dosage will be more expensive than the previous time. Yeah. So I found myself that I was spending more and more money just on being treated for malaria. At that time, I was earning about 250 to 300,000 Ugandan shillings, and each dosage was costing about 30,000, so about 10% of my income would go, not just on the dosage, but on the whole thing, consulting the doctor, doing the lab tests and getting treatment. And this was happening every month, like 10%, around 10% of my income will go on to the clinic. So one time I go to the doctor, and the doctor asks me, the doctor, the lab finds there is malaria in my blood, but the doctor says, we are not going to treat you because you might become resistant to the drugs. And I think at this point I had reached the most expensive drug which they were using, and like I think I couldn't. There was no drug which was more expensive than that. I think at that time it was Artemether, and it was maybe 15,000 Ugandan shillings, or between 10 and 15,000 Ugandan shillings. So I was a bit puzzled. I asked the doctor, but why are you not giving me treatment? I mean, your lab has found that there is a malaria in my body. So the doctor didn't give me a satisfactory answer. And then when I went back home, I rested. After 2 or 3 days, I had recovered. I go and check my blood. There is no malaria. And I'm like, what is happening here? So I began doing a bit of research about malaria treatment and all that. And I discovered a huge thing. And this is that fatigue, when you're really tired and you've not eaten food, or just even hunger can cause malaria-like symptoms. Same with fatigue, If you're really fatigued, you're really tired, you'll get symptoms which look like malaria symptoms. You'll have the fever, your joints will be hurting, you'll have trouble waking up in the morning, maybe you have back pain, maybe you're even vomiting, all those symptoms. But these clinics, they don't really tell people the truth about fatigue. They don't tell people the truth about hunger, and they don't tell people the entire truth about malaria, because they want to make a profit. So this was basically what I discovered, that there is a health system which is run on a for-profit basis, and the doctors, of course, the big pharmaceuticals don't tell these clinics that you have to deceive people who have fatigue so that they can buy your drugs. No, they don't tell people that. But they've created a system where it is profitable. It is more profitable to deceive a patient than to tell them the truth. Yeah. So all the drugs which Uganda consumes comes from outside the country, and I think they come from pharmaceuticals in India, maybe some of them nowadays, but mostly it was Belgium, Europe, those European pharmaceuticals. And so when I discovered all this, okay, I came up. When I began looking into malaria at that time, I saw that it was a big business for the big pharmaceuticals, and that is how I began thinking, of the injustice of all that. Then, around this time, I read an article somewhere about 2 Indian scientists who wanted to genetically modify a mosquito. So their idea was to eradicate malaria, they genetically engineer the mosquito, and then the mosquito won't be able to transmit malaria. But I was reading this article with the neoliberal health system at the back of my mind. And I thought, if the system as we have it today has created this evil, this scheme where you're being forced to take drugs, not because you're sick, but because somebody wants to make a profit. If that is the case, this is what is driving the whole health industry now. what will happen if some company somewhere owns a mosquito? You know, it owns a genetic, a living being. What is going to happen? We are in a neoliberal system. You are in a neoliberal world. So I just foresaw disaster, because if people can genetically engineer the mosquito, and then they can do, and they will do it purely to create profit, not to help humanity. And that was the spark of the story. Of course, in all this research, I kind of began looking, digging into how people in Africa and in other parts of the world used to handle malaria before colonialism, before, you know, Western medicine and all these big pharmaceuticals came in. And I discovered that malaria is actually controllable, and the means of controlling malaria are already within communities around us, and the means of curing malaria are already, the communities already have them. Actually, malaria prevention and cure doesn't even need government intervention if it is handled properly, because a small village somewhere can grow the right herbs which will cure malaria. They can take care of their swamps and their water systems, and which will eradicate of mosquitoes. There's no need for the big pharmaceuticals, and there's definitely no need for big, you know, technical innovations like genetically modifying a mosquito, just, you know, to eradicate this. So that was the thematic background for this story. So, and once I had this in mind, I knew I wanted to tell a story where which challenges the current system, but also which makes people realize that the solutions to their problem is very is right in front of their eyes, like they don't have to look very far away. So that's how I came up with The Leafy Man, and I've eventually made a short film as well, based on the theme. So the main character in the short story is a man, is a traditional healer, and I made him to be a bit elderly, because this is kind of what most people are. I mean, most of the traditional healers, they kind of have gained knowledge not from going to school, but from learning from other people. And the good ones are normally elderish. They are not really young, maybe in their middle ages and all that. And so when we open this story, we find him with a 2-year-old boy, and I say they are starving under an orange grove. I remember when I was trying to come up with this story, I wanted to put it in the orange grove as a symbolic thing, because oranges, the citrus, I think I read somewhere that they have, citruses have capabilities of repelling mosquitoes. And so when disaster falls this village, the only safe place these people have is the orange plantation. But of course, this old man, he came to this village, to this plantation deliberately, because he knew the mosquitoes that were attacking his village were afraid of mosquitoes. I mean, the mosquitoes that were attacking his village were afraid of oranges. It was just basically to show people that, you know, the methods of controlling, or what is there to control the malaria and mosquitoes today is already existent in nature. We already have it in our villages. We don't really need all these high-tech things like genetically modifying an entire species just to get rid of one simple or one of the problems that has plagued an entire continent. There's not much else to say about this story, but if you read it and then you see the background of me like going through all these malaria episodes and then thinking I'm going to die, and it was a kind of a traumatic thing, you know, every month you're falling sick, you're spending a large percentage of your income on treatment for a disease that you actually don't have. You know, it kind of bothered me a lot, and I had to write about it. I had to come out and say, okay, look, people have to begin talking about this thing, because we can't just let scientists keep, not scientists basically, but we can't let this system, a neoliberal system, keep determining to us, you know, how we live our lives and how we treat ourselves and how we, you know. So maybe I'll conclude by saying that, you know, there is alternative knowledge systems, and there are knowledge systems which are not like, okay, they call them traditional knowledge systems. I don't know why, but I think it will be good to look at all sorts of knowledge systems as being able to provide solutions to the problems that are affecting us today. But of course, because of the way the world is, it looks like only solutions that come from the white man, and I know white man, not probably even white woman, but solutions that come from the white man, who is probably looking for ways to make a lot of money, as sort of champion over all other solutions. So all these things were going through my head when I decided to write this story. And if you read the story, it's a very straightforward science fiction thing. There is a monster, it has attacked the village, and there is a hero who figures out how to destroy the monster. And then there is, of course, the villain who created the monster, and they are trying to get the hero so that they can, you know, figure out how he's defeating how he managed to defeat their monster or something like that. So it's a very pretty much straightforward story in terms of structure or things like that. But I like writing stories that are straightforward like this, but which, you know, give you an alternative view of the world. So many people who've read this story, they tell me that, oh, I never thought that, you know, I never thought this about malaria. It's not pretty straightforward that, you know. No, I don't say it in the story that, you know, oh, we are doing ABCD because it's a neo-colonial or neoliberal system and, you know, they're making money. No, I don't say that in straightforward ways, but by presenting the monsters and the company creating them in such simplistic terms, you kind of, I kind of talk about the whole issue that I've just spent, you know, all the first 10 minutes talking about. You know, like I just talk about how the neoliberal system is created, or how the health system currently is really profit motivated rather than being there to help human beings. That story that I'm sharing with you, I'm also going to provide a link. I'll give you a copy of it so you can also read it, and then you can, you know, maybe I think with both of these stories, sometimes you might have a question. I could probably have, I don't know how the classes are going to run, but it might be good if somebody has a question and they send me the question, and I could probably answer them at some point if I have the time. That shouldn't be a problem. However, I'll talk briefly about this second story, and then I could try to imagine the kind of questions you're going to ask about it. But basically it's called OBB. And OBB is it's a term for, it's a concept of a monster. It's basically a term. It's not a, it doesn't mean a monster, because when I say monster, you're going to think of, you know, something like, you know, something big, green, with a tail, horns, and, you know, something terrible. And yet, according to the Acholi, which is the people of my mother, OBB, it has no shape. Nobody has actually ever seen it. It's just what they think of as a monster. So it's shapeless, not shapeless exactly, but it takes the shape of your of what the person who has seen it imagines it to be. So it can be anything, really. So in this story, it's called OBB, and there is a boy who has grown up in a village somewhere, and he's ostracized, like he's been banished from the village because of his disability. And then one day there is a monster that comes, and it's destroying it's killing people in the village. And so this boy, because he has some magical powers, he is tasked with killing this animal, and not animal. He's tasked with killing this thing, and, you know, saving the village. In my longer video, of course, I told you that when I started writing about disability, they were very conscious decisions. And so this is one of those stories that I consciously thought about creating, you know, like the character. I really thought about, like, I want a character who has a disability, and then the struggles he's going to go through will directly relate to disability. However, there are things which keep bothering me, you know, like when I read about them, I keep wondering, you know, what would my life have been like way back in the past, when, you know, yeah, like way back, maybe 1,000 years ago, when survival really meant you needed to have 2 legs, and, you know, when you're not really disabled. In many communities around Africa, or some communities, not many, I don't know if there are many, but I've heard of the stories of some communities where children with disabilities were taken out of the village and left to die, maybe in a forest, maybe thrown in a swamp or something like that. So this story was basically me trying to deal with, I know it's not direct trauma, because I did not experience such a thing, but, you know, there is that trauma that comes from you imagining what your life will be like if you were in that situation. I don't know how to put it, but yeah, there are times, like, you know, you're sitting there in your bed and you're thinking, wow, if the world was, because even now, you know, the world is not really nice to people with disabilities. You find a bus stop, they have bus stops, but then the bus stop is like a mile from your home, and you have to walk that mile. I find this always strange when I go to Europe, and, you know, at least in Uganda we have the motorcycles, so you can jump on a motorcycle and you don't have to walk a mile to get home. But I always have a lot of trouble whenever I go to Europe, and I'm going to begin, you know, cutting down on those trips. If I'll ask them, like, how far is it? Like, do I have to walk? Do I have to do what? Yeah. Also, you know, stairs, you know, like, just facing stairs, it's always difficult and all that. So I keep imagining, you know, like, I keep thinking and saying, supposing I grew up in another lifetime, what would have happened to me? And that is how this story came about. So I imagine that point in the past where there was this rule in the village, and in this village, of course, they think people with disabilities have some kind of demon possession or are evil in some way, and so they are cast out of the village. But this boy is saved by one woman who becomes his foster mother and also his spiritual guide, and then she mentors him to become some kind of spirit warrior or a shapeshifter. Yeah, maybe I should say that. So he can leave his body, or he can transform his body so that he doesn't have to suffer walking, with a crutch or with something like that. Again, these are things that I lived with like all my childhood. If you watch the longer video, you'll probably have heard me talking about how I imagined myself, overcoming my disability so that I could escape the war that was threatening to break out in my town. So yeah, this is one of those ways, shape-shifting. Like, I just would imagine I had the power. Sorry. I just would imagine I had the power to transform myself into anything. But then, the way society makes you think that you are disabled because either of a past crime. In some communities, they think it's because you committed a crime in the past. In some communities, they would say it's because you are being punished. Like God knew you were a very evil person, and so if He left you able-bodied completely, you will become even much more evil. So He makes you disabled as a kind of preventive thing. These are kind of the stories that I kept hearing growing up, and things that people kept telling me. Others would say, oh, it's a curse. And then others would say, yeah, all sorts of things that revolve around all that I've said. So maybe in the longer video, I did not talk about how writing was therapeutic for me. It's kind of therapy, I kind of try to process whatever I'm going through, and then when I write, I don't want to put it in the cliche way that it makes me feel good, but just writing them down kind of gives them life in a way, gives my thoughts life. So me thinking of myself as a shapeshifter who can shift out of my disability and walk without problems, this idea, it comes out of my head, and now it is on paper, and maybe somebody else is reading it there and is imagining, oh yeah, this could happen. So writing this story, it was kind of something like that, I had to process. I think at that time I was going through a bit of a tough time with somebody a relationship which had ended because she discovered I had a disability, and we had been going out for a while, and I was like, how could you not have seen me limping all this time? Why is it an issue now? But yeah, so okay, I wanted to tackle the two things. One was the what I said about the yeah, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so two things which really came out in this story. Yeah. Okay, there is the fears, of this boy, the main character. He thinks he is the monster, yeah, or like his mother, his foster mother, because when he goes out into the forest to fight the monster, his foster mother tells him that you might be the monster or something like that. And so he does not know if he is the monster that is killing people or if there is another thing. The mother told him that you will, when you see the monster, you will think you're looking into a mirror. And so this boy thinks the monster is him, that he is the monster in some way. I think, like I was saying, this story tries to deal with all these things that I kept hearing growing up about disability and being evil. But it also comes from all the films that we keep seeing and all the stories that we keep consuming. In most of the films, there is a villain, a very bad person, but this is a person on a wheelchair, or this is a person with a disfigured face, or this is a person with some kind of deformity, a hunchback, a what. So they're always painted as evil. And in some part of me, like I kept thinking, all the time I was growing up, that am I evil? Am I a bad person? Is this why I have a disability? And yeah, these things, they never go away from your head. Even when you grow up and you know that you try to dispel all these truths, I mean, all these lies, you try to dispel them and you try to live your life, that, oh yeah, it's really a medical condition. I was born, I mean, it's because I fell sick and because of a certain virus, that's why I have this. There is nothing to it about curses or evil or anything. However much I try to tell myself all these things, at the back of my mind, it's always eating into me and asking me, like, but sometimes, you get that voice and it's whispering, yeah, boss, why are you like this? You might be an evil person. So I put all these things into the main character, and all the fears he was going through are fears that I actually go through. All the questions that he goes through, or he has about himself, are questions that I have about myself. So some of the yeah, I lost my thoughts again. Okay, this would have actually been nice if I could have answered questions after you reading the stories. But basically, I think in these two clips, I've mostly just talked about my processes and how I translate my life experiences into fiction. OBB is a horror story, and it's not a fiction. It's not a biography. It is a biography. It is emotionally a biography, an emotional biography. Like, I have to kind of put down all the emotions that are going through me, all the fears that are going in my head. They are kind of, yeah, it is an emotional biography. And I think all the stories that I write have sort of emotional biographies in many ways. Even the first one I told you, the Leafy Man, because it was an emotional biography of all the trauma I would go through, like with a sickness, with the malaria, and having to pay a good sum of my money to doctors every other month. Most of the stories, yes, I write them just to process like what's going on in my head, and to kind of give them a concreteness, to make them like feel more real. I don't know, or yeah, like for my fantasies to come out as real, and also for my fears for me to make them more palatable, and so that they are not actually a nightmare and they don't end up hurting me in a way, I think. Yeah, something like that. So I hope you enjoyed the stories, and I hope this background information and stuff like that kind of, gives you a hint on how I end up creating stories that, based on my life, but they are really way out there, like horrors and with monsters and with giant flying mosquitoes and stuff like that. Thank you for your time.